And hello, everyone, and welcome back to Two Guys in a Bible here on Fulfilled Radio, a voice you can trust. My name is Don K. Preston. This is William Bell, and we got a really special program for you this evening. Um, night before last, it was night before last, wasn't it, William? You had the debate?
Uh, that was Friday.
Yeah,
It's been a
yeah.
couple of nights before
Oh,
last.
man. I've slept twice since then. Anyway, William had a debate with a real nice young guy named Tommy McMurtry, and the debate was on the resurrection. And so we're going to discuss that debate tonight. I was in the chat room, although I didn't participate in the chats because there was so much nonsense going on there that I just didn't feel like I wanted to get involved in, to be honest about it. You know, there were people saying, just remember, Mary is your real mother. You need to bow to Mary as your true mother. And oh no,
Well,
not going
good.
to.
I didn't see any of the stuff going on in the chats.
Yeah, it's probably best that you didn't. There were plenty of anti-preterists on there. There were uh, plenty of people, William, that were very much on the preterist side, appreciating what you were doing and saying and the job that you were doing. Um, so take take that to heart for what it's worth. And many of them were pointing out what was so blatantly obvious to me is, and you even pointed this out during the debate. I thought it was excellent. Tommy McMurtry kept saying, "Well, I believe, this is what I believe, etc." And in one of your responses, you said, "Well, Tommy's done a real good job of telling us what he believes, but he hadn't proven it from the
Yeah.
Bible." And that's what this is. That's what the debate's all about.
hmm
It's simply not enough to get in a debate and say, "Well, here's what I believe." It's not the point.
Not
This is
even good when you're preaching just to say that all day long.
That's exactly right. And so it was, I had several people tell me and express to me, and I posted the debate on probably 15, maybe 20 Facebook pages, William.
Mm.
And one of the comments that I got so often, I mean, maybe more than any other comment, was Mr. McMurtry was in way over his head,
Mm.
that he simply was not prepared to deal with the issues that you raised. I felt the exact same way during the debate. Now, he's a very affable, very amicable young guy,
Mhm.
and very friendly, what have you, but that doesn't win debates. It doesn't carry the day insofar as evidence is concerned. And so, as usual, I really appreciated the fact that you presented very careful, very logical, soundly exegetical, soundly hermeneutical arguments. And he literally did not know how to respond to them. So I thought we would hit some of the highlights. First of all, let me ask you to give your summary of how you thought the debate went. And
Well,
some of the highlights and what have you.
yeah. Well, I'll just touch them briefly. One thing was the affirmative that I made that I thought he just basically totally ignored.
No.
Yeah,
He did the Passover.
yeah, he definitely did a passover on that. Didn't want to engage with that, and I thought it was very clear. As a matter of fact, I saw one comment on Facebook where a person said, that was one of the most just clear presentations of the issue that he had ever seen. Now,
Very powerful, very
yeah,
powerful.
and I thought it was just so simple that no one could miss it. I mean, it was like Adam ate and died, Adam eats to live.
Yeah.
And so that was the first thing that I noticed, that he didn't want to engage with that. Another was his and I don't know why these guys do it. They've come to debates, and most of them probably have more debating experience than I do. We have rules that, okay, you ask questions, I ask questions. And the moment it comes to, our question Q&A time to question them, to query them, they want to interrupt and they want to start asking questions. Now, I know that part of that is the responsibility of the moderator to
Yes.
check that and make sure that that doesn't happen. And of course, part of it was my responsibility. I felt like I was doing well enough in the debate that I didn't have to make an issue of it, but I wanted to. A time or two, I thought about it, and when I thought it was going to let up, it never did. It just continued on.
Yeah.
So that was one of the things. Another was a comment that was made about Tommy McMurtry's behavior in the debate, the way he conducted himself. And this person, of course, he says he's no fan of mine. If I called his name, you'd know who I'm talking about, but I'm not going to call his name. And actually, he said he was no fan of either one of us, but he said,
right. I read that comment.
Yeah. Basically, that he felt that Tommy's approach in dealing with a subject that, as you say, was over his head or that he couldn't handle was the way he handled it, by either reverting to ad hominem arguments
Yep.
and just trying to say derogatory things about the preterist view. And I'm saying, what makes that? And basically he was saying that was his best approach, so to speak, or I couldn't. I thought that was just really wild. You're going to tell me that the way to conduct yourself in a debate is to violate the rules, and then speak derogatorily about a position that you can't refute, and that's a good strategy. That really says something about people and what their aims are in dealing with things. So that was another thing. And of course, there were several points along the way that I thought, the one on Philippians 3. When I
oh my.
When I dealt with the word tapinosis.
Well, and let's back up.
Okay.
The point you made on Philippians 1, verse 6. I was a little bit like you and folks, if you haven't watched the debate, William made the point, and it was the already but the not yet concerning the work of Christ. And Paul's writing to the Philippians, and he said, I'm confident the one who has begun a good work in you will complete it at the day of the Lord. And William is saying that's the work of salvation. That's the work of redemption, et cetera, et cetera. It's even the work of resurrection, to be honest about it. But Tommy comes back and he says, no, that's absolutely false. He said the work that had begun in them was the building of the church. And I thought William was going to fall out of his chair. And I just about fell out of mine.
Yeah.
That's the first time in my life I have ever heard anyone say that the work that God had begun in them, in the Philippians, was the work of establishing a church at Philippi, instead of it being the work of salvation.
Mm-hmm.
And then you went to 1 Peter chapter 1, pointing out that the brethren there in Asia were receiving the goal of their faith, i.e. the salvation of their soul. And Tommy goes, I don't know what connection you're trying to make. I don't see any connection between these two passages. Wow. I know you were blown away by it, and I was too, because I think you said, oh, wow, or something to that effect. So anyway, you pointed out that Christ, or that Paul said, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. And then you went to Philippians chapter 3. So pick it up from there.
Yeah. So as you said, from Philippians 1, 5, and 6, pointing out that work that had been begun in them, he would perfect it or complete it at the day of Christ. And then, going to Philippians chapter 3 to point out that, this is what Paul was looking for. And I can't remember exactly what he said on Philippians chapter 3, but he did make a statement regarding Paul not attaining to something. And I pointed out that what he was trying to attain to was the resurrection. And, going back, looking at the context where he said that he did not want to be found with the righteousness that was of the law, with his own righteousness, which was the righteousness of the law, and also, pointed out the technical term of the word found, which is used several times in Scripture. In Daniel 2, it's used in 2 Peter 3, it's used in Revelation 20, all in an eschatological context, and therefore, a technical term for the parousia. but that he wanted to be found with the righteousness of Christ, which, of course, as you and I know, is life, it's resurrection, Galatians 3:18 and 21, it's the inheritance. And Paul's saying that he had not yet attained to that, and it was the ex anastasin. That blew him away as well. I mean, he just didn't like, the fact that Paul didn't quote the King James Version,
Right. Yeah, he is a King James only guy from what
Yes.
I've heard. And he was like, "What are you talking about? Resurrection out from among."
Hmm.
He said, "I
Yes.
just don't understand that." And you said, "Well, you obviously don't."
Yeah. And but that was the issue. So here was Paul, as I like to say, with his feet above ground, wanting to attain to the resurrection, and which he called being made perfect as well.
Right.
Reflecting back to Philippians chapter 1. And so that was, one of the points in the debate that I just really wondered, what was going on, why he couldn't see some of those things. I mean, I would think that he would have at least been prepared for some of those things if he had listened to the preterist view. You had an interview with him, and
Yeah.
I know you couldn't cover everything, but you touched a lot to have given him some insights, and he came back and did what he called, he kind of styled it damage control, but he didn't mean
Right.
it in a negative way. Was very decent about the way that he approached it. But at the end of that presentation, of course, he then kind of lambasted it a little bit, in a nice way. But that seemed to me that he was at least giving it some consideration. But I didn't see much of that during the discussion. Now, one thing that I was also taken aback about was the fact that we were supposed to exchange questions. Well, when I first submitted that idea, it was, quite a while before we even got to the time of the debate. But I don't think we exchanged questions until about maybe a week before the debate.
Yeah.
And then I was expecting to say, okay, I'm ready to give you the answers. That never came back. We never exchanged the answers. I don't know what his answers were to my questions. And, he didn't get mine. So except for, what was in the debate. So that I thought was not good as well.
Right.
That we didn't get a chance to exchange those questions. I mean, he gave me some reason as to why it didn't happen. And I know both of us were busy, we're all busy when we do these things. But that was another thing that was kind of a low point for me in terms of that, because you get a chance to at least see what the person is thinking, see what their answers are, and they get a chance to see yours. And so you can build on that in terms of, of the discussion. But
Well,
that didn't occur.
I thought, and you used the term one of the low points. I thought the low point in the debate, from Tommy's perspective, certainly not yours, was that when he just simply resorted to saying, "Well, Mr. Bell is saying so many things that are so far out in right field, so far removed from orthodoxy," and he said, "I really don't even understand what I'm hearing." Well, why did you enter into a debate? And like you
Yes.
said, he interviewed me for over an hour. Why didn't he understand what I was saying? Because you and I are pretty much lockstep, in 99%
Mm-hmm.
of the stuff on covenant eschatology. So why didn't he understand covenant eschatology instead of getting in this debate and saying, "Well, Mr. Bell's just so far off the wall, I just don't really understand what I'm hearing at all." Well, I think the problem was he did understand it and he did not have an answer for it. So what does he do? He makes the old cliched appeal to orthodoxy.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes a lot of people feel comfortable. You can wrap yourself up in that warm, fuzzy blanket of orthodoxy and say, "Oh, see the boogeyman out there? They're not orthodox." And that's what I saw him doing at that time. And
Yeah,
again,
it's kind of
I'm
reflection back to Sam Frost, right?
oh boy, is it ever. Uh, and I'm not trying to be harsh or critical on Tommy. Like I said, he's a very nice guy.
Yeah, he is.
Seems to be a very nice guy. I appreciate his demeanor just an awful lot. In the interview that he did with me, he was never at any point of time, harsh or critical or condemnatory at all. And he told me, "I'm not going to debate you at all. I just want to ask questions," and that
Mm-hmm.
was just fine. But anyway, when he appealed to that warm, fuzzy orthodoxy, I thought, well, okay, that's kind of raising a white flag. because that says I don't know how to answer what Mr. Bell is saying. And to go back to your very first affirmative, that was so compelling. And it laid the groundwork, and it caused me at a point later in the debate, after you had so clearly delineated the problem of Adam was a problem not of biological death. It had nothing to do with going into the dirt. It was all about separation from God. Well, he admitted that.
Yes, he did. More than once.
More than once. So I'm going, okay, well, here we go. And then turn right around and say, but that led to his physical death so many years later. But then later in the program, he acted as if he was shunned or shocked, I should say, and say, are you telling us that you don't believe that the death of Adam involved physical death? And I'm going, didn't you pay attention? William spent 20 minutes or 15 or whatever it was, giving you the exegetical reasons, hermeneutical reasons for why it was not physical death, over and over and over the points that you made. He ate to live or he ate to die. One of the two. What's difficult about this? Now, I understand if you are unfamiliar with any of the arguments whatsoever, if you've never contemplated it before, and if you're strictly locked into the physical death paradigm, I can understand how that's quite shocking. But the way you presented it with your charts, everyone could read the charts. They're right there. They were right there on the screen. What was difficult about it? And so I just felt like he realized he had given the farm away by admitting this is spiritual death. And then the train ran over him. So it's like, oh, well, it's spiritual and physical. And then when you started to come to 1 Corinthians chapter 15, and as usual, your explanation of 1 Corinthians 15 was spot on. He absolutely did not understand the point about the dead ones, Christ being the first fruit out of the dead ones. The point that you made, and Tommy pointed out, well, look at all these people in the Old Testament that were raised out of physical death. Were those physical deaths or not? And of course, well, yeah, as you answered, yes, those were physical deaths, but Christ was the first fruit. He was not the first person to be raised from physical death. Went right over Tommy's head. I mean, he literally did not grasp your point. And when you then emphasize that Christ was the first fruit and use the imagery of the harvest, saying that means the harvest is not only imminent, it means the harvest has already started. He didn't touch that.
No.
He didn't say one word about that, which is more than revealing because, I mean, after all, if you have the beginning of the harvest 2,000 years ago and the harvest had begun, why is it not still ongoing? That's kind of what first fruit's all about, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. Since you went back to the Genesis point, and I still want to touch on that Philippians 3:21 thing a little bit.
Yeah, go ahead.
But, you went back to the Genesis point, and one of the things that he had emphasized somewhere in some discussions, I don't know whether it was in the time that he interviewed you, or whether it was in the time that he responded to that interview in his sort of damage control thing. He had talked about the death of Christ. And he said, he couldn't see how 1 Corinthians 15 was talking about anything other than, the physical resurrection. But I knew that one of the things that he wanted to do was to hone in on Jesus's death, and we were going to have a resurrection just like his.
Right.
The information that I presented on the sacrifices, the common sacrifice, lamb for dinners, lamb for sinners, and showing how unique the death and resurrection of Christ was, and that no one could have a death like that because of its sacrificial import. I don't think he responded to that at all either.
No.
And
William, I truly believe that point it either struck home so hard and so well that he decided that he couldn't deal with it, or it just went so far over his head. And Tommy's not dumb by any stretch of the imagination. He's a very sharp young guy.
He is.
So I really felt like the point that you made of the distinctive nature of Jesus's sacrifice, that it was a sacrificial, substitutionary death. We cannot and we do not die on the behalf of sin, for the behalf of sin, substitutionary death. We can't do that. So Christ's death on the cross was totally distinctive. And while we are baptized into that death, we are not dying that kind of death. And that's such a stunningly important point that, again, as I sat and watched him, as you went over that, okay, that lambs for dinner, lambs for sinners, or lamb for sinner. I thought that was really good. You're really good at coming up with little cliches like that.
Well, sometimes they just pop up and I can't resist them. So I just put it in there. But
it was good.
You look for something simple that
Right.
will stick in the minds of people, but actually conveys, the meaning.
And it does.
That did. And
very effective.
I mean, it is clear if you study, the sacrifices in Leviticus, and the fact that, the priests ate in order to bear the guilt of the congregation. And if they didn't eat, you remember Moses chided Aaron and Moses after Nadab and Abihu had been killed for not eating that sacrifice, because Moses understood what that was all about. And of course, because of the trauma that, Aaron was going through, of course, he didn't do it. And explain that to Moses. But that idea is just profound, that the eating of that sacrifice, that's what they were doing. And so a common person was not able to do so. And that made that situation unique. Going back to,
I thought it was a brilliant point. I really did.
Yeah. Going back to the Philippians text on the word tapinosis, the reason I wanted to touch on that a little bit was, I don't know that you remember, you may or you may not, but long time ago when Ed Stevens and I were discussing resurrection, and you got a paper that I wrote that I was going to do a book on and never finished it, but you took some of the excerpts from it and put them in your Death of Adam book, the questions that I had in there. But one of the things that came out in that discussion with Ed was Philippians 3:21 and the word tapinosis, which is the word humiliation. And he was just blown away with the meaning of that term in relationship to the body there in Philippians 3:21. And when I told Tommy, I said, "Hey, we've never had a vile body." Did you see his reaction to that?
Yeah. Because, and let me interject right here.
Yeah.
You caught him in a massive, massive self-contradiction when you asked him, first of all, are we born as sinners?
Mm-hmm.
And he said yes. And then when you went back to Romans chapter 5 and showed, no, the reason we die is because we sin, not because we are born sinners, but because we sin. He was lost at that point. He wandered and meandered and stuttered and stammered, trying to explain himself out of that dilemma. And I thought that was particularly powerful.
Yeah. Well, very good. But anyway, that connection between the humiliation of the church, the tribulation they were going through, the shame they were going through, the persecutions they were going through, is in harmony with what Jesus suffered when he humbled himself. Same word, tapinosis there. It's one is just a verb and the other one is a noun, but it's the same idea. It was suffering on the part of Christ, and then suffering on the part of the church in following, his sufferings as an example, as, First Peter tells us. And that's what that difference was. That's what that change was. And it was one that the entire body of Christ was enduring and going through, just like Romans 8:18 says. And, that was the case. And I know he didn't have a sufficient answer for that, when we presented it.
Well, you're exactly right. And it was, I believe this entire concept, William, of the sufferings of Christ and you didn't dwell on that concept. I understand that. So this is kind of external to the debate itself. But the whole concept of the doctrine of the sufferings of Christ as presented in both Pauline and Petrine writings, and how the early church, as the body of Christ, was experiencing a mirror image of what Jesus went through in order to fill up their measure of sin, and to bring that body to its maturity, to the point of vindication and glorification, the removal of their shame, back to the tapenosis, you know. I think the whole concept, back to the debate, I think the whole concept of tapenosis was beyond Tommy's at least level of contemplation. I don't think he had ever really looked into it. I think he was so focused on, oh, well, the physical body is under a curse. You know, the physical body is a vile body, which is just simply not a biblical doctrine at all. But that's so ingrained in especially in the Reformed circles, and in the future circles, that the entire creation, and you know, Tommy did mention Romans 8:18. I believe that one of these days, you know, the whole creation is going to enter into glory, and what have you. But if there was any point that I thought could have been developed even more by you, that was the tapenosis concept. Although I think it was lost on Tommy. I don't. So it's kind of a balancing act. You know, would the audience have fully understood it? I thought it was obvious he did not understand it. And so, as in any debate, you look back and you say, oh, man, I could have done this. I could have said that. Or, yeah,
always,
every single debate. Okay, William, we're almost halfway through the program. I wanted to look at, or were there some other things that you wanted to point out?
Well, I mean, you can go ahead, and if we have time, I'll throw some other things. You know, just this one.
Okay, go ahead.
Obviously, the preterist view is about time.
Oh, yeah.
As a major issue. And I was just shocked that he didn't at least try to deal with that at all. It was like when you mentioned those time statements, they just kind of went right by, no defense against them whatsoever. And, you know,
he made one super brief comment. I just don't think William's handling those texts properly.
Yeah.
Something to that effect. I'm going, well, why don't you try to prove it then?
Yeah, nothing exegetical to deal with them.
No, but you're right. I was particularly focused in on your use of mellow, the repeated use of that in the New Testament about the things that were about to come, pardon me, and the at hand, the soon, the quickly text. And every single time that you would mention one and that you would try to drive the point home, his eyes would basically almost glaze over like, okay, move right along now. Nothing to see here. It was very telling.
Okay. Well, that's it for now. So
okay,
if an opportunity comes, go ahead.
Okay. One of the points that he asked, or questions that he asked, and the question was repeated by Tristan Gabriel in the Q&A session of questions from the audience, is and Tommy's question was, what changed in AD 70? Now, Tristan Gabriel put kind of an ironic, sarcastic almost twist on it. What was their facial expression in AD 70 when the change took place? And your answer on that was just absolutely great. But anyway, let's go back over that, because you know as well as I do, this is one of those questions that we hear over and over and over. Okay, if the preterist position is right, and if the Lord came in AD 70, then what happened? You know, and of course, Tristan asked the question, how was that being caught up in the air in 1 Thessalonians 4? How did that affect them visibly over there in Thessalonica? So let's discuss this. What changed in AD 70? Was there something experiential, something, may I use the term visible? Was there something that people could see? Because, I mean, after all, as Tommy said over and over, they're going to see, they're going to see, they're going to see. So go back over some of the things that you said in the debate that I thought was more than sufficient.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't see where that would have been a problem. And had he got my questions, I had a list of about 10 things on the list in terms of things that changed. Obviously there's the completed change of the new covenant. Okay. One of the points that I mentioned that I got some feedback on, that someone said, wow, I learned something there. And that was on the fact that they had to become full grown before they could inherit.
Yep.
I actually first discovered that point when I was debating Stephen Wiggins years ago.
Oh, yeah.
And so in Galatians 4:1, I mean, he tells you that, a son differs nothing from a servant, though the son is Lord of all, but is under tutors and governors until the time appointed of the father. So there was an appointed time of the father. It pointed to the time of his becoming of legal age. And that is shown in the New Testament by the fact that the saints were given the gifts of the Spirit. And that's what Paul is talking about in 1 Corinthians 13, when he says, when I was a child, I spoke as a child, I understood as a child, I thought as a child, but when I became a man, full grown, I put away childish things. Well, the time of becoming full grown goes back to Philippians 1:5-6, when they become a perfect man, to 1 Peter 1. Receiving that gold, the telos, all of that is that perfection. But it was the miraculous gifts poured out according to Joel's prophecy, that you can't snatch and slap, and that's a joke from time past. You know what I'm talking about, and put a New Testament application on it. But anyway, it was those gifts that brought them to that. Well, the people under the law didn't receive the gifts, according to Galatians chapter 3. That's what distinguished the true sons of God from those who were not. God gave them the miracles. And Paul raises those questions in Galatians. Are you being made perfect by the flesh? Meaning under the old covenant, where you're depending on human strength in order to obtain your righteousness. And so those gifts were given to those in the church to bring them from that state of being nepioi, or underage children, to become full grown so that they could inherit. So when that goes into that point in Galatians 4 and verse 3, where he says, but we, when we were children, were in bondage under the elements of the world. And, one point that stuck out with me a long time ago that Max King made, he says, Christ could not fulfill the promises of the fathers in the realm of the flesh. And thus he had to die and enter into the realm of the spirit. Well, that same was true, just like you were just talking about the suffering that had to be filled up. The same was true for the church. They couldn't fulfill the promises or receive the inheritance in the realm of the flesh because that was their childhood state. They had to come out of that. But in their coming out, it was the already but not yet, because the miracles were there to bring them to the point where they would be full grown legally, if you please, using that concept, so that they could then inherit. And of course, that's the change. Now, if inheritance doesn't constitute a change, what does? I just don't know what does from that perspective.
Let me interject right there.
Sure.
I thought it was rather telling when you pointed out that the inheritance, when a person receives the inheritance, is there a change? And he said, well, it depends on what the inheritance is.
Yeah, that was the comment, wasn't it?
I was like, seriously? It wouldn't matter if your inheritance was a $10 bill or a $10 million inheritance. There is a change on the reception at the time of the reception of the inheritance. That was a purely defensive, obfuscatory type of a comment to try to escape the point that you were making.
Exactly.
And let me just build on that just for a moment. What we're talking about here, what you're driving home here, is so critically important, and that is the time of the inheritance. And Galatians, Hebrews, Colossians is so clear that the time of the inheritance is at the end of the law of Moses. It's not at the end of the Christian age. And yet Tommy's position, and the position of all futurists, as a matter of fact, is that we don't get the inheritance until the Christian age comes to an end. Wait a minute. That says that the Christian age is the time of immaturity. The time of maturity is at the end of the Christian age. And that's a lot of what you're getting at here and what you were trying to convey in the debate. And again, I just did not feel like Tommy was getting that point with full comprehension.
You know, one point that I could have made, I wish I had made. This is one of these points that you know, you think about afterwards. But even when he went to First John chapter 3, the text says, you know, behold, now are we the sons of God? Well, you know, just like in Galatians 4, where it says, you know, they became a son in order that, you know, they would be an heir, and that's the purpose of being a son, you know, period, because that makes you an heir. Well, you have the fact that they were sons of God, but were they sons of the resurrection, according to Luke chapter 20 and verse 35? That would have been an excellent point to drop in there at that point to say, that's something that changed. You're still advocating for a future resurrection, so you can't be claiming that you are, you know, a son of God according to the resurrection. And that's the essence of what First John 3, I mean, there are other elements in there, as we brought out all the time, in terms of, you know, what's stated there. But that would have been a perfect, you know, just short, pithy answer to what changed.
Yeah, I agree 100%. That would have been absolutely great. Another point that you made, pardon me, and I couldn't help but think and like I said a few moments ago, I didn't comment in the comment section. There were so many things there that I'm going, holy cow, there's some really strange comments on here. So I wasn't going to get involved in it a lot. When your audio and video dropped out, or when your audio did, I very quickly typed without even thinking. I lost William's video or feed, and all of a sudden people started typing, Don Preston's in the room. And I thought, well, okay, I'm backing out here. I'm not going to get involved in a lot of this. But nonetheless, I thought this was a real point that, to go back to Tristan Gabriel's, well, were there a lot of smiles on their face? You know, what was their facial expression at the AD 70 rapture, I think is the term that he used. But that point that you made, well, one of the things that there was an obvious, visible change is there's no more animal sacrifices. That's a pretty powerful.
Yes, it is.
Pretty visible, very experiential type of change that anybody, anywhere, halfway with eyes could experience. I mean, you know, there's no more temple, there's no more priesthood, there's no more sacrifices, et cetera, et cetera. You telling me that wasn't a radical change in the ancient world? And that's among both Jew and Gentile. Jerusalem was known throughout the ancient world. Tacitus, the Roman emperor, Roman historian, excuse me, was very much aware of the glory, the power, and the meaning of the temple in Jerusalem. And he said people went from all over the world, as he knew it, of course, just to go to Jerusalem and see it. So even from the perspective of the pagans, this was a massive, visible change.
Yeah, just think about the fact that that was the straw that broke the camel's back for the Romans when the Jews stopped offering the sacrifices on their behalf.
Absolutely.
So, you know, definitely that was a major issue. And, you know, we get that objection all the time about, you know, we're talking about, you know, the temple falling in Jerusalem. What has that to do with people in the rest of the world, besides the fact that Jews were scattered about? But as you say, there were the pagans who were also interested in what was happening in that temple. And of course, if you go back to Isaiah 25:8, he talks about the veil that was spread over the nations. Israel, through their misunderstanding of their promises and focus on, you know, having earthly kings, etc., had basically spread a veil over the nations of deception. And that was removed so that the nations could then clearly see what salvation was all about, independent of the law. And so that was a major thing for the nations as well. You know, that question. A lot of times, of course, you've written a book on this. You've got a book on First Thessalonians and on the resurrection in in that chapter, and which I recommend people read because it's excellent material. Just some great exegetical work that you've done there. But it amazes me how little, seemingly, some people are, just unaware of that text and its correlation, for example, with Exodus chapter 19. It's the same thing. The reason the whole nation of Israel didn't go up that mountain was because of sin. Moses was allowed to go, as representative of the nation, but it was a meeting just like in First Thessalonians. The difference is now that their sins are removed and they have the atonement, now the entire congregation can ascend. And that's the idea behind that. I tried to think of N.T. Wright. I was the person that said, his name was on the tip of my tongue and I couldn't call it at that point. And I have his book sitting right across from me over the shelf, and I think I got one behind me. And I just couldn't think of his name. But even he is acknowledging that point and that correlation between Exodus 19 and First Thessalonians 4. And then besides that, is the time statement. But again, what do people experience on their faces? I've seen people cry. Yep. When, I remember, this is just a joke, but it's a true story. I remember when I was a kid, we were in maybe about the second grade, and we had a contest to do something. I don't know whether it was, read or something, or answer some questions. But anyway, the prize was 25 cents, a dime, and a penny. And I won the penny, and it tickled me so bad that, how you have these tears of joy, but I mean, it was just so funny to me that I won a penny. And, but people react to things differently. Some people show no emotion whatsoever with things. They have a deep inner sense of joy, and you would never know that. That's right. Just looking at their faces. And then other people, they express it in outward ways. But in terms of the fact that it happened, it's an acknowledgement that people would see. And you couldn't miss. I mean, look at the book of Revelation in chapter 18 and look at what the merchants are saying about, the fall of the temple and the loss of commerce that resulted from that situation. So, there was a lot there. I'm still trying to wrap my mind around why that's a critical question.
Let me address that.
Sure, go ahead.
And it. People today are basically just like the Jews. If they don't see, they don't believe. I well remember Brother James D. Bales, that name, the man, brilliant man in many ways. When he was very first told about covenant eschatology, he was told about Max King and Max's writings and what have you. And then later he was introduced to my work. And his response was, my eyes are not seeing what my ears are hearing.
That's right.
I was blown away by how inconsistent this man was. Now, look, folks, it was my privilege to know the man. Okay. Brilliant guy, wonderful attitude, great logician. I think he did some of the best writing against dispensationalism of many of the early Church of Christ writers. And like I said, it was my privilege to know him. I got to sit down with him at Tulsa at the International Soul Winning Workshop many years ago, and it was not long before his passing. He had cancer and a very, very sad situation. But when I had read his statement, my eyes are not seeing what my ears are hearing, I could not help but reflect on some of his writings, in which he said the problem with dispensationalists is they're not looking with the right eyes. And so at that Tulsa situation, and I wasn't going to try to engage in a lengthy debate because it was obvious he didn't feel good. But, again, we knew each other and we had some pleasantries. And I said, Brother Bales, I said, I read your comment against the preterist view. And I said, I was really troubled by that. I said, because in your writings against dispensationalists, Dispensationalists tell us, oh, my eyes are not seeing what my ears are hearing. You amillennialists, you Church of Christ folks are telling us the kingdom is here. I'm not seeing that with my eyes because the lion and the lamb and blah, 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 blah. And I said, you've written wonderfully against that. But I said, now you're using that against preterists. I said, I'm at a loss to understand that. And he literally just muttered a few words and he said, well, Don, I don't really want to talk about it.
Mm.
Okay. That's as far as the conversation went. Like I said, it was obvious he was not feeling good. So I didn't pursue it. But people today have that same, quote, Jewish concept. What did Paul say? The Jews seek after a sign. They want to see something. Okay. And so Tommy, throughout the debate, what did they see? What did they see? Paul said they were going to see the Son of Man coming, et cetera, et cetera. And his emphasis was on the visible. Well, how many times in the book of John, the Gospel of John, did Jesus castigate the Jews because they did not see what they were expecting, and so they wanted to kill him, or they condemned him, or they just simply rejected him? They were not seeing what their ears were hearing. And here is Tommy and all dispensationalists, all futurists. They're guilty of falling into the same identical hermeneutical trap. And it's difficult. I mean, we as human beings are sentient beings. We're aware, and we look at things. We very often determine things by our senses. You know, can I reach out and touch it? Can I see it? But how often does the Bible tell us we do not walk by sight, but by faith? We do not look at the things that are seen, but the things that are unseen. The kingdom of God does not come with observation. The kingdom of heaven is in your midst. On and on and on, the New Testament, from the Gospels all the way through the epistles. We're told, look, folks, this is not something you're going to be able to see. You're not going to go out in the desert and say, well, there he is. No, not going to be that way.
Yeah, a response I made to that question that Tommy kept raising, well, what did they see? I pointed out, and first thing I pointed out was Ephesians 1:18, the eyes of your understanding. And that's what you are to see the hope with. Paul said that you may know what is the hope of his calling with these eyes of understanding. But also I pointed out the fact that, what Jesus said in Matthew 8:11 and 12.
Oh, yeah, that was very good.
That the Jews would, who were outside of the kingdom, now they would see Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob sit down in that kingdom that does not come with observation, that you could only see if you were born again into it. And the fact that here are the Jews, they were able to see that. How much more so the saints who recognized it as well, and none of which was physically visible. So, it's a matter of
such a powerful point.
Yeah. I thought so.
Well, the only thing, and you and I have discussed this many, many times, and this gets back, you don't have time to get everything in. But as you were making that point on Matthew 8:11, I thought, oh yeah, okay, go to Luke 13:28-31. You yourselves shall be cast out.
I wanted to do it.
I know you did.
Yeah.
I knew you had to have it. I knew you had to have it up here somewhere. Yeah. I wanted to add this to the point because he kept asking, because when you made the point about the Jews seeing, he said, well, okay, but what about the Gentiles out there in Thessalonica and Athens and what have you? And you made a sufficient answer. But here's the thing that I thought of, William. And in my book, The Gospel of Destruction, I posed the question, okay, why would the Gentiles care about the destruction of Jerusalem? I had a debate with John Welch in Indianapolis in 2008, 12, I don't know, somewhere along in there. And John Welch gets up and in very dramatic style says, well, Preston says, fall of Jerusalem is the coming of the Lord. What would the fall of Jerusalem mean to people in Corinth, 800 miles away, in Thessalonica, in Athens, 100 or 800, 1,000 miles away. Now, as you know, I had double pneumonia during the entirety of that debate. I would, every single night after the debate, I would go to the hotel room and just throw up my shoe soles. It's just, oh, goodness gracious, how am I going to get through with this? So anyway, in spite of having double pneumonia, when John Welch said, what would the people in Corinth and Athens have cared about the fall of Jerusalem hundreds of miles away? I said to the audience, I said, well, Brother Welch, ask us why would the people over here in Athens and Greece, etc., be concerned? I said, let me turn that question around a little bit. Here's a fact. Fewer people knew about the death, the burial, and resurrection of Jesus than knew about the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70. By far fewer people. The fall of Jerusalem killed 1 million people. It sent slaves all the way to Egypt, to Rome, to Corinth. It sent slaves throughout the Roman Empire. So why would people be so concerned today? Why should people today be concerned with the death of a rabble-rousing Jew? After all, that's what he was called, who hung on a cross along with 2 other criminals. And I got to tell you, William, there was literally an electric shock went through that audience. There's over 250 preachers there. When I posed that question, why would people in America care about the death of a single Jewish man on a tree in Jerusalem if we're not supposed to be concerned about the destruction of the city that represented the Old Covenant? Well, here's my point, and the point that I made. Throughout the Old Testament and the New, Gentile salvation would only be perfected when the Old Covenant system was taken out of the way. The destruction of Jerusalem was God's visible sign that now there is no exclusive chosen people. There is no singular chosen people. Now, all men everywhere of any nation are invited to come into Christ and to become one new people. So why would that not be wonderful news to the Gentiles living in Rome, Athens, Corinth, Macedonia? Why would it not be good news? And that was something that they could, I mean, they may be 800,000 miles away, but as the news came, do you reckon that there were some smiles on some faces of the Gentiles in these cities throughout the Roman Empire that now, wow.
You know, one guy made a point. He sent it over like right after the debate. He said on that very issue, he said the Romans never converted to Judaism, but they converted to Christianity.
Oh, wow. That is a great point. I hadn't thought about it
in
that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point.
Yeah.
Yeah, the church conquered the Romans, and the Romans conquered Judaism.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a very fantastic point. I thought it also interesting. Now, William, am I mistaken? I think I said this to you over the phone yesterday or whatever. Did not Tommy McMurtry early in the debate refer to Hymenaeus and Philetus in 2 Timothy chapter 2:18? And say that they were saying the physical resurrection had already taken place? And then later in the debate, did he not change and say, well, they were saying it was a spiritual resurrection?
Well, I don't know. I thought it was just the opposite way around, because the first time I thought when he said it, he said there was a figurative resurrection that took place. And then later he came and said that it was physical. So either way, I mean, it's the same contradiction.
Oh, yeah, you entrapped him really, really well by pointing out, okay, if Hymenaeus and Philetus were saying the resurrection is past and that's spiritual, Tommy McMurtry, you believe the spiritual resurrection had already taken place. Yeah, that to me was an incredibly powerful point. And again, it was one that seemed to just go right over his head, or it either went over his head or he just decided, I'm going to act like I didn't hear that.
Yeah. I mean, and you're pointing out in the text the distinction between what Paul said, as you know very well, because you wrote, a book on it as well, and you and I have talked about it a lot. But there is Paul saying, if we died with Christ, we believe we shall also live with him. So there's the death and life antithesis that he's talking about. It's future tense, just like it is over in Romans chapter 6 as well. And then in Second Timothy 4, verse 1, there's that word mellow again. He's about to judge the living and the dead. So resurrection coming at the parousia and his kingdom. That was the time difference between what Hymenaeus and Philetus was saying compared to what Paul was saying. And that's real simple for people to get without going into all the other temple typology or typological background and the usurping of authority of the two different priesthood, of the priesthood of Christ that's based in Numbers chapter 16. How can you study Second Timothy and not see about this house, this temple, the priesthood, and reflect back on Numbers? It's right there in the text. Anyway, it sounds like you had something else, and I know our time is getting close.
Our time is getting away from us, but again, I thought the point that you made the point no less than 2 or 3 different times of saying, Tommy, you're the one saying that spiritual resurrection was a reality and it was over. And now you're saying that Hymenaeus was saying that, and Hymenaeus was a heretic. So you're agreeing with Hymenaeus. And again, as I listened and I viewed it, I thought, Tommy is either not getting the point, or he's getting the point and just deciding, I'd better not say anything because I'm in a lot of trouble here. And I don't know which one it was. I really do not know. I don't want to judge at all. But to me, it was such a profound point. And again, I obviously misunderstood, but I misunderstood the whole thing. I thought he was argued initially that Hymenaeus and Philetus were saying the physical resurrection was past. And then he changed to saying the spiritual resurrection had passed. Well, if he did that change, if he made that change in the debate, that is a massive, debate conversion right there. But it wound up putting him in even more trouble. And I know that early in the debate, when he initially made the argument, I was sitting here going, okay, William, ask him the question. How could anybody believe the physical resurrection was already past?
Right.
That's why I was thinking that he made that argument, because I was hoping that you would say, Tommy, okay, how could Hymenaeus convince anybody that the physical resurrection had already taken place?
Didn't that come up somewhere in the debate? I thought it did. Maybe I'm just thinking past. I thought I don't remember that question.
Yeah, I don't remember you asking that question. Perhaps you did, but I may have missed that.
Well, I know that I talked a little bit about it when we went to the text in 2 Thessalonians, and because I was paralleling those two.
Yeah. That's exactly right. You did mention it then. You are correct on that. Okay, we're out of time, but let's hit Job 19 real fast. I was literally stunned when Tommy went to Job 19:25. In the last days, I know that my Redeemer lives, and in the last days he shall stand upon the earth, and in my flesh I shall see him. I was shocked because modern scholarship today, I mean, from N.T. Wright on, you do not hardly find a modern day scholar. In fact, N.T. Wright makes the comment, there are virtually no modern scholars who would appeal to Job 19 for the doctrine of a future resurrection. And yet here Tommy was doing it. So a close out with a comment or two on that text.
Well, as you were saying, you can't find a scholar. I appeal to, just a couple, and there are several who comment on that particular text. But even the marginal reference in a King James Bible, after my skin is struck off.
Yeah.
And so you can't be in your skin and out of your skin at the same time. Yeah. And that is the more acceptable rendering. But like you did in your debate with one of the things that was pointed out that it could possibly as well refer to the time, and I don't know whether you raised that point or whether he raised that point, but nevertheless, Job 42 and verse 12, I think it is, where Job is restored to all of the blessings and even beyond of what he had lost from the beginning. So either
not only
Go
was it
ahead.
restored, but he said, I have seen this with my own eyes.
Yes, yes. And so either one of those interpretations would fit in the scriptures, and scholars acknowledge both of them. And for
Absolutely.
people to use that text, as a resurrection text, just doesn't cut it. I think Job 14 would be a better text to use for resurrection than Job 19:25 in terms of trying to force it into a physical.
And even Job 14 simply affirms, is there going to be life after death?
Yes.
It simply poses the question.
Yes.
Okay. Well, William, we are out of time. Great show, great review. Great job that you did as usual in the debate. I really enjoyed it. And I know a lot of people enjoyed the debate, good decorum, courtesy throughout. And so that's the kind of debate that can get people thinking. And that's what it's all about. Speaking of which,
I learned from the best.
Oh, well, we have confirmation. We just got it over the last 2 days. October the 12th, I will be debating Dr. Richard Carrier, who is a very noted atheist, former believer in Christ, supposedly. But we will be debating whether or not Jesus's eschatological predictions failed. So
Wow.
I'm very, very excited about that. We can be looking forward to that. So everybody get that on their calendar of October the 12th. All right. Well, folks, with that, I'm going to say thank you, William, and good night. God bless.
Good night.